Thank you so much, Lucy, for your kind words. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you out there, depending on where you're actually joining us from. As you know, this is a session on working in mixed ability classrooms and the question of differentiation. We have chosen I guess a provocative title: Differentiation Doesn't Work, or Does It? And this is what we're going to cover in today's session. We'll invite you to take part in a poll, which hopefully will help you to explore your own thoughts on differentiation a bit and how you feel about it also. We will then briefly summarize two important articles on differentiation by two authors. One is actually an article which basically claims that differentiation doesn't work, while the other one actually says that it does, in fact, work. We'll summarize their main arguments there. From there, we'll go into what research says on how effective differentiation actually is. Can we justifiably claim that we should invest the time and the energy and all the effort it takes to work in a differentiated way in our classrooms, and what does research say about that? From there, we look at our own 6 principles of differentiation. So we'll kind of like lay out our map of what we believe differentiation needs to include and how we need to go about it, before we show you a few practical and concrete examples, and we will round this off with our view of what innovative materials and digital tools could actually contribute towards making differentiation something that every teacher can do in their classrooms in a satisfying way, especially also when you have quite a lot of hours to teach, when you teach many different classes, and you need help from both digital tools and materials. Let's actually now start this poll. So what we're going to ask you in a minute is we're going to ask you to look at 5 statements, and we would like you to tick one of 4 choice boxes with each. So whether you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. And these are the 5 statements. Differentiation sounds good in principle, but it doesn't work in practice. Statement B: it takes too much time to find different content for different students. C: it's better just to group students into stronger and weaker classes, then we don't have to differentiate. D: I'm not clear what I meant to be differentiating anyway. Syllabus, content, methodology. And last but not least, E: differentiation requires a completely different way of teaching. So you're now going to see these 5 polling questions, and we would like to ask you to react to each one of them by scrolling down on the little window that you will see in a minute. Lucy, could you please share the poll?
I can see the poll on my screen and people are participating. If you're not able, I'm going to perhaps relaunch it. So just bear with me a moment, because I can have people participate.
At least I can't see it. Chris, can you? No.
Not yet, no.
Okay, some people are saying they can't, so I'm going to try to relaunch the poll. Just give me a moment and I'll... Did I relaunch it? Let me try and see what happens when I do that.
You think I should go out of the PowerPoint, maybe? Oh, it doesn't change anything, does it?
What people are telling me is that they saw it at the end. Let me, sorry, right at the beginning when opening the conference. So let me try and see if I end the poll, if it gives me the option to relaunch the poll.
Okay.
It's telling me that 65% of people have already participated. Yes, lots of people have already participated, but I will try to...
They did it before they came into the before we opened the session, maybe.
Yeah, so lots of questions have got 98% have answered, 100% have answered, 100%. So lots and lots of people have done it. It says click on more and it will give you the poll. Thank you so much, Aisha, for sharing that with us. It says click on more and you can see the poll. So if somebody hasn't, down at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom controls, and this is for participants, Herbert and Christopher, I can see you two looking. Your panelists, you may not have the same options, but you're the presenters. But for participants, if you click on the 3 little buttons at the bottom of your screen, you should see.
Can you share the answers with us?
I will. If I can see it's telling me 70% in total. It's going up. The number's just slightly creeping up. So let's give people just one more minute.
Okay.
And then I will click on end poll, and then you'll all see the results of the poll.
Okay.
Let's just, if that's okay, we'll give everybody a minute more. Yes, I can see more and more people are answering those questions. So let's just wait 1 minute more. Okay, if that's okay, would you like to see the results now?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
You're making this exciting. Oh, lovely. Thank you. Right. So sounds good in practice. About almost half, 46% agree, and another 6% strongly agree. So more than half actually of the colleagues agree in one way or another. Disagree, we have 38, and strongly disagree 14. So half almost, basically. Thank you. Then let's have a look at the second one. Takes too much time to find different content for different students. Strongly disagree, majority agrees or strongly agrees. It's better just to group students into strong and weaker classes, then we don't have to differentiate. That is a majority that disagrees. Roughly 70% actually disagree, and 25% agree. Number 4, I'm not clear what I meant to be differentiating, okay? Strongly disagree, 15%, disagree 32, and 46 agree, 6% strongly agree. So again, about half between agreeing and disagreeing. And now we have differentiation requires a completely different way of teaching. Strongly disagree, 11% agree, 25%. Almost 50% agree, and 15% strongly agree. So that's lovely. Thank you so much for your interesting replies. We can see there are really contrasts in opinions here in this webinar. Well, let's see what we can do about this as we go further into it. So let me briefly summarize now the main arguments from 2 articles. One is by an author by the name of Delisle, who says that differentiation doesn't work. And he says differentiation is a failure, a farce, and the ultimate educational joke played on countless educators and students. In theory, differentiation sounds great. The problem is this: although fine in theory, differentiation in practice is harder to implement in a heterogeneous classroom than it is to juggle with one arm tied behind your back. Well, I'm not a juggler, but it sounds a pretty frustrating experience to have to juggle with your arm tied behind your back, actually. So what does he say? What reasons does he give in support of his argument? He basically gives two reasons. The first one is the biggest reason differentiation doesn't work and never will is the way students are deployed in most of our nation's classrooms. And in this case, this is an author who comes from the US. So he's talking about American classrooms. Tossed together several students who struggle to learn, along with a smattering of gifted kids, while adding a few English language learners. So that is an L1 language context, obviously. So the few language learners are immigrant kids, and a bunch of academically average students, and expect a single teacher to differentiate for each of them. That is a recipe for academic disaster, if I ever saw one. Second argument, a second reason that differentiation has been a failure is that we're not exactly sure what it is we are differentiating, in line with what quite a few of you also said. Is it the curriculum or the instructional methods used to deliver it, or both? Teachers want and need clear guidance on what it is they are supposed to do to reach differentiated nirvana. Okay, so this is Delisle, and now let's look at what Tomlinson, Carol Ann Tomlinson, one of the leading experts in the area of research into differentiation, what she actually says in her article, Differentiation Does in Fact Work. She says Mr. Delisle's fundamental argument doesn't seem to be so much that differentiation can't work under any circumstances, but rather that perhaps it could if we just group students by ability. So by having classes with academically strong students, medium maybe, and classes with kids who need a lot more support. While I know of no aspect of education on which all studies are in total agreement, this one comes close. For many reasons, students in lower track classes don't achieve as well as they do in heterogeneous settings. And it's true, there are actually quite a number of studies. There's real evidence that heterogeneous classes actually are better for the students' learning. The counter-argument number two that we have put together comes actually from various studies, and this shows that it's not true that there is no agreement on what differentiation entails. There is actually clarity as to what areas of teaching need to be adapted for differentiation to be effective. And we have written up those areas here. First of all, content. So that would be different materials for different students, both for their learning, but also for their assessment, okay? Materials and activities. The second one is product. Students of different abilities are asked to produce different products. Think of, for example, texts they're supposed to be writing according to their ability. The third one is process, different paths towards a goal, different ways of doing things, both inside and outside the classroom. And last but not least, what some people call the educational environment, what I actually call the psychogeography of the teaching and learning process. Here we are talking about teaching environments that can actually be supportive, or they can kind of like obstruct or hinder, at least not facilitate our students' learning. So that's what is also reflected in a way, these different paths, these different routes in this quotation from Caroline Tomlinson. She says, and this is a kind of differentiation that Chris and I like using. She says differentiating instruction is doing what's fair for students. It means creating multiple paths so that students of different abilities, interests, or learning needs experience equally appropriate ways to learn. There's one key argument here that actually stresses that it's not just the materials, it's not just the different paths, it's not just the different tasks, not just the learning environment. What counts a lot also is the teacher's attitude, okay? And both research in neuroscience and in cognitive psychology, actually, Caroline Tomlinson says, reveals two findings that should be central in educational planning. First, virtually all brains are malleable. So when we teach as those students are smart, they become smart. And secondly, the teacher's attitude is extremely important in this process. She says that teachers who believe firmly in the untapped capacity of each learner and thus set out to demonstrate to students that by working hard and working smart, they can achieve impressive goals, get far better results than teachers who believe some students are smart, others are not, and little can be done to change that. So this points in the direction of teaching as a self-fulfilling prophecy, we could say. Chris, over to you.
No, I think it's still you.
To me.
Yeah, back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. So let us now look at what research says how effective differentiation can be. I mean, there's no doubt that any classroom is a mixed ability classroom. Even if you say, well, let's put all the very good students in one classroom, you will still have differences in ability. So that's almost a mundane statement. But if that is the case, and we also know that differentiation requires a lot of effort, time from the teacher, then the question is, and it's a fair question we have to ask, what the impact of differentiation is on the success of the students' learning. So, in other words, the question we're asking is there evidence that differentiation actually works? And we're looking at what research says about what is called high impact teaching strategies, or in short, HITS. Two of the most influential general researchers in general education, Hattie and Marzano, have actually carried out a number of very important meta-studies where they looked at thousands of studies on the outcomes of different strategies on the students' learning and what contribution they make to the students' success in learning. And they have actually filtered out what is called the HITS, the high impact teaching strategies. We'll look at the top 10 of these in a minute. Okay, so just one more time. HITs are the top instructional practices that reliably increase our students' learning wherever they are applied. So we're talking empirical evidence here. So here you can see the 10 most important teaching strategies: goal setting, clear lesson structuring, explicit teaching, giving students worked examples. So in other words, scaffolding the students' learning by giving them models of what they're supposed to be producing, collaborative learning, multiple exposures to information, to texts, of course, also in our case as language teachers, metacognitive strategies, questioning and answering, various kinds of integrating feedback processes into the lesson, and last but not least, differentiated learning. Now let's have a look at the effect size of these different strategies. As you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen, effect size is a way of measuring how well an intervention works in varying contexts. And we can say that as a rough guide, the effect size of 0.2 and above can be regarded as small. 0.5 and above can be regarded as medium, and 0.8 and above can be regarded as large. Now, when you look at these 10 hits here, the 10 top hits, then we can see they are, of course, all at least medium in their effect size. Quite interestingly, I guess quite a few of you know that one of my hobby horses in teaching is developing cognitive skills, metacognition, and so on. And this actually, from these here, is actually the highest of all in terms of how far it could go. Now, can I ask you to use the chat and guess what you think the effect size of differentiated learning and teaching, of course, also would be? Could you kindly type in your guesses here? Oh, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, 0.85, 0.4, 0.78, 0.7, 0.8, 0.5, 0.7, 0.5, 0.7, 0.65, 0.7, okay, 0.7, 0.85, 0.75, 0.7, okay. Lovely. Thanks very much. So we can roughly say between 0.4 and, Susan, thank you, and 1. So you're basically saying medium to large. Well, quite interestingly, the two numbers they're giving are 0.5 to 1.28. And this is actually sensational. I mean, it does show that the way we differentiate actually will kind of like, in a way, influence the outcomes, of course, of the differentiation process. But it also shows pretty clearly that it can go up very high, really, even up to 1.28. Okay, now here, Chris, you will not give it back to me. It's your turn now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you all today. In a few minutes, we'll look at our suggestions and some examples as to how you can put differentiation into practice, both in the classroom and for your learners outside of the classroom, with some concrete examples. But we'd like to start with 6 principles that we believe in when it comes to differentiation and why we feel they're important. Herbert, if you can click on to the next slide, please. Here we have a quote. It's actually quite an old quote from someone called Harrington Emerson, who was in his day, an innovative thinker when it came to helping quite complicated or complex processes to lead to a successful outcome. We know that learning a language can be quite complicated or even complex. Although this quote is more than 100 years old, we think it still holds true today, because really what it is about empowerment. It is about empowering people by giving them principles to bear in mind when they are then implementing specific methods or practices to try to lead towards success in that process. Whereas if you were only to give methods and the process, and you say to people, you follow this step by step, then they're likely to run into trouble. It's important to have that understanding of the principles that lie behind the thinking. So we wanted to walk you through our top 6 principles that we have in mind when we're thinking about differentiated teaching and learning for mixed ability classes. Next slide, please, Herbert. Okay, the first of these, and it's said, I think, including by Caroline Tomlinson, that above all, differentiation when it comes to teaching and learning, more than anything, is about maintaining a flexible mindset. Of course, it's important how we do things as well, but the mindset is really key. You may recognize the guy there in that photo. Next, one more click, please, Herbert. He is, of course, Christopher Columbus, possibly a slightly contentious figure these days in terms of his reputation, but most well known still for his journey across the Atlantic and, in inverted commas, his discovery of America. Of course, he wasn't the first person ever to set foot there, but that's what he's known for. When you think about that journey that he took in 1492, he set off across the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't actually have a specific destination in mind because, he'd never been there before. No one from the old world had ever been across the Atlantic. But he had a goal in mind, and that goal, that objective, was actually knowledge. It was to prove that the world was not flat, but it was in fact round. That was his goal. He also didn't have a map to guide him. He didn't have a path that would lead him step by step across the Atlantic to a specific destination. He had a compass and various other instruments of that time that would guide him and tell him if he was heading in roughly the right direction. But he needed to undertake this journey with a spirit of flexibility and a flexible mindset. That is a lot like teaching and learning when it comes to differentiation, but also just generally, that we need to respond to what we see in front of us and maintain that flexible attitude. Next slide, please, Herbert. You could say, in fact, that we're talking here about an agile mindset. You may be familiar, or you may have heard of agile methodology. This is something that originated in the development of software, and it's something that has flexibility really at its heart. It's something that I'm fairly familiar with from a role I had a few years ago working with a team developing digital tools for teaching and learning, for English language teaching and learning. And it always struck me at the time, and I still believe that now, that the kind of qualities that are espoused by this agile methodology are the kind of qualities and characteristics that actually indicate good teaching and learning. So things like regular reflection on how things are going, adapting accordingly in terms of what you do next, continuously seeking and giving feedback so that success can be acknowledged, progress recognized, areas where further work is needed can be identified. Setting not just those longer term goals in terms of your objectives and where you ultimately want to reach, like Columbus on the other side of the Atlantic, but setting those short term goals that you can move through step by step and adjust your path accordingly based on the evidence of what you see in front of you as you move along that journey. This has obvious relevance to mixed ability classes, to differentiation, to adjusting how we do things according to need, according to the evidence of what we see in front of us. Fourthly, Believing that in the right contexts and with the right conditions and with effort and work and dedication, ability can improve. Students can get better, and maintaining that belief in a growth mindset. And that's one of the reasons why basically just ghettoizing students who need more support in a separate class and having the high flyers in their own separate class is not going to be the benefit of either of them. It's important to have that growth mindset, believe that everyone can get better. And finally, using a variety of techniques and tools, including crucially digital tools these days, that can facilitate all of the above. We're not talking here today in this session about solely what you can do in the classroom with your learners, because one of the key challenges, as has been highlighted earlier by Herbert in what he showed you, is just the practical challenges and difficulties sometimes in implementing differentiation in the classroom. We'll show you how we believe that can work, but what can happen outside of the classroom is also really key, and digital tools can really help with that. We'll show you examples. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, the second key principle, while mindset and having a flexible mindset, we believe is really important. Of course, technique is also important too. It's really important to know how to do a job, how to achieve a task, which tools to use, which techniques to use, when to use one, when to use another, in effect, to know the ropes. Otherwise, we tend to get tangled up in knots. So we're not saying that technique is not important. It absolutely is, and we'll show you those concrete examples of how we believe differentiated teaching can work without being a whole new methodology. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, principle 3, an evidence-based sense of things. What do I mean by that? So looking at these different tools here, and the context I'm thinking of is me in the past on a journey in my car somewhere, and I don't know where I'm going. Which of these tools is going to be best for me? I remember the days when I had a printed road atlas, and I used to map my path out on the printed page before I set off, and then I would have to try and track my way all the way through. That sometimes wasn't particularly helpful. A compass wouldn't be very useful when you're driving. It's okay when you're out walking in the woods. But a sat-nav, of course, these days combines the best of both of those. It gives you that map view. It tells you whether you're headed in broadly the right direction. It updates you in terms of where you are relative to your goal, your destination, with real-time information. So this is something that is really helpful. And I'm drawing the comparison here really with those digital teaching and learning tools that can help you to see where each of your learners is in their journey towards their goals. The reason that we say, so just going back to that previous slide still.
Sorry, Chris.
Thank you. The reason we say an evidence-based sense of things, the evidence is the kind of thing that you get from those digital tools, online tests, practice, etc. But that needs to be balanced by the sense that the human brings, that the teacher brings, what you see in terms of your own observations. Sat-navs, for example, have led to an increase in the number of instances of drivers joining UK motorways in the wrong direction because they have too much faith in the sat-nav and it directs them in the wrong way sometimes. You need to know when to use your own judgment as well. So an evidence-based sense of things, combining the best of both worlds. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, fourth principle is that in order to have that accurate view of where your class is and where the individual learners within your class each are on their journey, you need regular cycles of learning and assessment. Here, we're not talking about the kind of assessment that is purely to give a grade or a mark. We're talking about formative testing, formative assessment that can inform what happens next in the teaching and learning process. After all, if we step outside of the world of ELT again, if you go to see the doctor and when you're feeling unwell and you describe your symptoms to the doctor and they say, okay, well, based on what you've told me and what I can see today, I would give you a health score of 5 out of 10. Goodbye. you're not going to be very happy with your doctor. What you want them to do is probably send you for tests, for those test results to be analyzed, for some kind of remedial treatment to be given to you. See if you get better. That will imply further testing, further analysis of test results, and further treatment. That effectively is the same cycle that we're talking about here. Setting those goals, learning, assessing, analyzing the results, and then going through that cycle. This is something that has its own challenges in terms of practically how do you do this? How do you find time to do this for all your students all the time? It's probably not humanly possible without technology. There are tools that allow this to work and allow, again, combining that evidence-based sense of things, the digital tools supporting the teacher as the human making those judgments. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the fifth principle, this takes me back to the days when I used to play quite a lot of football. I was always the figure on the right of your screen, only with a little bit more hair than that guy there has. I was always a goalkeeper, and I always remember the best team that I played for me, was the one where the training sessions that we had a couple of times every week didn't just put you in one group and get you playing a practice match. It actually separated you out. So the three goalkeepers in the squad would have their own training. We would work on the specific skills that we needed, our own strengths and weaknesses, then come back together with the group, and then one of us would play the match on the Saturday. So the point here is that, obvious analogy with teaching and learning, all classes are mixed ability classes, all students are individuals, they all have their particular needs. And to be fair to them, going back to that quote from Tomlinson earlier, we need to try to address their particular needs as best we can. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and finally, you may wonder what a wolf has got to do with this. This is a wolf that actually lives just down the road from me in the valley. There's a pack of wolves a couple of kilometers away. And my wife and I, one of the things we like doing in our spare time is going out and filming them. We filmed this one last spring. And we actually had a couple of years where we were getting loads and loads of clips of this pack of wolves, because we knew where they were, which paths, which tracks they were on. And then suddenly they disappeared. And for about 6 months, we just couldn't find them. And my mistake was that I kept thinking, well, I'll just keep putting the cameras on the same track, and sooner or later I'm going to find them again. That didn't happen. Eventually, we moved to a parallel path not very far away, and we started finding them again. And this really goes back to that point about the belief in the growth mindset, and the fact that, learners can also shift paths unexpectedly. And the key thing is not to make assumptions, but to have that evidence that we gather from our own observations, from the kinds of things that we can get via those digital tools and what they do online as well, and really follow them where they are and not make assumptions about, students who need more support will always be in that position, and the stronger ones will always be stronger. So that was just a lesson for me in a completely different context. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this is just a summary of the 6 principles. So a flexible mindset is really key, but it's also really important how we do these things in practice, because mindset alone is not enough, of course. We need evidence, but we also need our own judgment. We need those regular cycles of learning and assessment, so we stay in touch with where our learners are. They then need, as far as possible, as far as we can deliver it for them, either in class or online at home, that personalized learning that caters for their individual needs. And then going back to the point about flexibility, we need to remain curious and open-minded in terms of how we see our students progress, and believing in that growth mindset. Okay, at that point, I think I do now hand you back to Herbert.
Thank you, Chris. Now, let's have a look at a few practical examples. And we decided to actually show you a mix of different ideas here. And we actually starting with something that we guess many of you are familiar with when you're developing your students' speaking skills. you often work with what is called substitution tables in your materials. Now, when you look at a substitution table like this one, it's actually very easy for us and very clear, and we can imagine how a learner can actually use this to say meaningful things. And yet, when one sits in on classes and watches what happens, we notice that some learners seem to have problems, especially when the utterances, the sentences they are expected to produce seem long. And in this substitution table, this is the case. When you look at something like, on Saturday evening, I'll probably hang out with a few friends or what have you, that is actually quite demanding in terms of length. On Saturday evening, I'll probably hang out with a few friends. That's 16 binary digits, 16 syllables. And learners, especially in the early phases of their learning process, often find it difficult to retain so that they can actually use them fluently, chunks of language that go beyond even 10 syllables. That's why we often notice in classrooms that it is certain learners, the better students, who will actually be at ease with using substitution tables like this one. So let us discuss now what kind of strategies we could use, okay, when we want to put this into practice. Strategies that will work with most students. Well, first of all, we could present the substitution table, read out the top sentence by pointing at it word for word. If you have, like, say, if you have written it on the board, or if you have a whiteboard or what have you, and then ask the learners to repeat. So in this particular case, would be on Friday morning, I'm going to meet a few friends. Then you could create a different sentence as the teacher, as an example. You remember the importance of worked examples by pointing at the words again, and again ask the class to repeat. And finally, you tell the students to put together sentences that express what they want to say. You will need to give them a bit of time, of course, because we don't want them to do something like that in a mechanical way, where they just produce correct sentences that do not express what they really want to say. And finally, we could get students to say their sentences and react naturally by asking questions, by being surprised at what they say, by reacting naturally to the content of the sentences. But then, as we said, you would get students who actually find it difficult to use these longer strings of words in a fluent way. So a strategy, for learners who need more support, weaker students, would be what is called backward chaining. In other words, on Saturday evening, I'll probably watch a film on TV. If that is difficult for a learner to say in a natural way, we can actually, that's why it's called backward chaining, start with the last word or with the last chunk of language in the sentence, a film on TV, and ask learners to repeat, a film on TV, watch a film on TV. And they will say, watch a film on TV. I'll probably watch a film on TV, etc., 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 until they can actually repeat the final sentence here. It's kind of magic that when we use this backward chaining, which I think was initially developed by Sandra Sauvignon, if I remember correctly, that students will really retain longer strings of words and will be able to use them in a far more natural way. So that would be a strategy for learners who need more support. But then also, of course, we have learners who are more advanced, and we want to challenge them. We don't want them to feel bored. So in this case, you could tell them to study the substitution table on their own, make sentences without looking at it, so studying it properly, covering it up, closing the book, and then make sentences that are meaningful to them. And pretty soon we could also encourage them to go beyond the substitution table and use language that is not included in the table. So prove that they actually have a far wider range of lexes and also occasionally structures. So that is something that is good in terms of techniques to have up one's sleeves. We teach, use strategies that would work with most students in the class, observe the class, do what Chris previously said when he was talking about this cycle of learning. So I observe my students. I see that some students have problems. I will use backward chaining for them, or other techniques. Of course, there are others. Backward chaining is just one example of facilitating this for weaker learners. And when I have other learners who actually don't need this kind of support, I can give them the tasks that I mentioned, I've just mentioned here. So this is a set of different techniques for one single area, in this case using substitution tables. Chris, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll look at another 3 examples, practical examples, in a second. But first, we wanted just to acknowledge really that one of the key challenges when it comes to implementing in the classroom differentiated teaching for learners who find themselves in different places currently in terms of what they're able to do, what they're able to cope with, is the classroom management side of things. And hopefully that example that Herbert just showed you, suggests to you that we don't need to be looking at a completely new way of teaching here. It's not a completely new methodology, but it does imply a certain amount of thinking and decision making that needs to be taken on the part of the teacher. So deciding which of these strategies and techniques to use with which students, and also crucially whether they can be used as we say here, consecutively. So with the whole class, where you may nudge up or down the level of challenge as you go through these consecutive activities to suit different students with their different capabilities, or whether sometimes you can have them working simultaneously in different groups, perhaps, where there are the stronger students working in a group or in separate sets of pairs or whatever, and the students who need more support doing something slightly different or being supported more by you, the teacher, working simultaneously. And the truth is that sometimes with some activities, with some strategies, it's possible to work simultaneously. Sometimes it isn't. And, we couldn't honestly say that, because it wouldn't be practically possible, that you're going to be teaching, in effect, 2 classes always at the same time. That's one of the challenges and one of the objections that is often raised when it comes to differentiation. That assumption that it means you're teaching 2 classes in one all the time. That is not what we're proposing here. This will come up again later with some concrete examples of what we mean in terms of that consecutive or simultaneous type of scenario. The second point here, this is maybe a bit further down the line, but ideally, gradually over time, trying to involve your students in that decision-making about what they choose to do, for example, in terms of the kinds of tasks they may do, that's the process they go through, or the kind of, production that they end up making, the output that comes from the students. So, you know, the content can be differentiated, but also the kind of tasks they do and what they actually do in terms of output, helping them to make those decisions and choosing between different activities gradually over time. And in doing so, also helping them to reflect on their own learning and to be, you know, better independent learners. Okay, moving on now to the next slide. So this is the second concrete example strategy that we'd like to show you. This one is focusing on identifying word boundaries. And, you know, we know that natural speech can be really difficult to unpack and to decode. When students are listening to a stream of natural speech, one of the key problems often is that they just can't tell where one word stops and another one starts, or where one key chunk of language stops and another one starts. And therefore, being able to better identify those boundaries between words is an important aspect of bottom-up listening. In other words, helping learners to actually become better listeners and not just do comprehension activities. So going on to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of the kind of strategies and techniques that may work with most students, a series of short tasks here for them. You can tell them that you're going to read to them a series of short sentences, and their initial task is simply to listen and to count the number of words that they think they hear in each sentence. So this is to get them attempting this activity, attempting to differentiate between the number of different words and between the words, where they start and where they stop. Then you can move on and do this as a dictation, where once they've thought about the number of words per sentence and made a note of what they think the number is, you then read them again and they can actually write them down as a dictation. Do that again several times if necessary until they feel they've done as much as they can. Next slide, please. That may be too challenging for some learners. In that case, that first bullet point there, you could ask those who need more support or who require less challenge. Initially, rather than trying to count the number of words in each sentence, they could just listen out for the number of main stresses that they hear. This will be a lesser number. It will be easier for them to identify than the number of words. They can do this at the same time as stronger students are listening for the number of words. So this is an example where basically with the same content, i.e. you reading out these sentences, they can be doing different tasks depending on what they feel they are comfortable with. Then you can move on with the learners who need more support. Sorry, still on the previous slide, thank you. You could actually, if that's too challenging, even that, you could use just shorter phrases or just a few words. You could reduce the speed at which you read the phrases or sentences, but still being careful to retain those features of natural speech, because that is the point, that you're trying to help them to decode that stream. Whereas the more advanced learners, you could use longer sentences or increase the speed gradually at which you read. Those differentiated activities, the last couple that I've mentioned, you wouldn't be able to do simultaneously, of course, because you're going to either be slowing down or speeding up, and with one group. But if we look at the next slide, and just one more click again. Thank you. So looking at the kind of, more or less challenging shortish sentences in the middle there, he eats lots of apples and pears, or a longer sentence, he eats lots of apples and pears from his friend's garden, or just a short little phrase out of the sentence, so lots of apples. You could start with either the short phrase and build up to the longer sentence over time, or you could start the other way around and start with the longer one and then work back down and then back up again. Really taking a view based on the balance within your class as to whether you start at the more challenging end or the easier end and go up and then down, or down and then up. In that way, they're working consecutively together through the different activities, through the different stages, but there are challenges being nudged up and down as you go to suit the different capabilities. Okay, and I think I hand you back to Herbert there.
Thank you, Chris. We will actually take the liberty to work 5 minutes longer. Is that okay? If that's okay with you, so you can set your watches. But the next two activities will up the pace a bit. So this next area is training students to read out loud. This is an often discussed and frequently discussed topic among teachers. Students should read out aloud. They should learn to read out aloud, but not texts that others can see while they're reading. So, for example, a course book text, that is a very boring activity for students, as we know. What we want is we want them to use texts for reading out aloud that, for example, they have produced themselves, could be text they have written as homework. So a strategy that will work with most students is to give them a minute or two to go through the text they're going to read. Then we can ask them to take turns reading out their text. The important thing is here that they read, they learn, and that's a process. They learn to read to the audience, not to the text. In other words, we have to show them how they can do that by not just looking at the sentences all the time, but they actually, by looking at the sentence, taking it in, and then looking at the audience and just occasionally glance down, but looking at the audience in order to keep eye contact while they're saying the sentence. It does need practice, but it will actually help them to become good readers. Now, this could be difficult for some students, learners who need more support, because maybe they are not very fluent readers. For them, in order to become good fluent readers, what we could do is give them a good auditory model of the text. In other words, use a smartphone or an iPad or what have you to record their text for them. So make an audio recording of their text, then tell them to sit in a corner, listen to the recording repeatedly while looking at their own text. And then once they are at ease with reading the text without constantly looking at it, ask them to read it to you first. Later, they can read the text to the class. A strategy for more advanced learners would be to give them a short text they're not yet familiar with, ask them to go through it and search online for the pronunciation of unknown words, just use an online dictionary for that before reading out the text to the class. So a range of different techniques that we can use here for the average or the majority of the students, shall we say, students who need more support and students who are actually advanced learners, students that need to be more challenged. Chris.
Okay, thank you. I'll be very brief on this one. The fourth example, this one is focusing on intonation. We know that intonation is a really crucial part of being a successful communicator. You can get the words right and get the intonation really wrong, and your meaning and also the motivation behind what you're saying could be completely misunderstood. So, sometimes in while we're really focusing and learners are focusing on getting the words right, they can neglect, and maybe we can neglect a little bit, helping them to actually say the words in the right way and get the intonation right to convey their meaning and their motivation and the intent behind what they're saying. So this is an important area. Next slide, please. You can demonstrate its importance really easily with very short phrases like, it's snowing. That's clearly positive. Someone is excited. Probably what they're going to say next is, let's go outside and make a snowman. Or you could have, it's snowing. Someone who's angry or disappointed, and probably they're thinking, oh, I've got to go to work and my car is snowed in and I'm not going to be able to get it out. I'm going to have to walk to work. So, even with short utterances, it's really easy to demonstrate the importance of intonation, how it changes meaning and attitude. Next slide, please. So in terms of how you help learners with this, this is a good area for noticing activities. So after they've used a piece of audio, a script for some other purpose, just questions or comprehension, whatever, you can give them the script, give them the transcript of the audio, and get them to listen again. And they just have to notice and mark where they think there is very noticeable intonation, either up or down. You could even get them then to try and draw the arrows, whether it goes up or down and how steeply. It's notoriously difficult to get that right, and it doesn't really matter. There's no correct answer as such. It's all about noticing and getting them to see how important this is. Then get them to practice saying the phrases with that intonation that they've noticed, just the phrases with that strong intonation, and then the whole dialogue. Moving on to the next slide. With learners who maybe need more support, rather than getting them to notice where the intonation is, you could give them a version of the script where the noticeable examples have already been marked by you. So all they have to do is listen and actually see and notice because it's already there on the page for them. That again is an example where it can be done simultaneously. You can use the same audio and have the different students of differing abilities either marking the intonation themselves or just noticing it. They can then go on, the learners who need more support, to try and imitate that intonation, or maybe just hum the melody that they've heard rather than trying to bother at that stage with the actual words. Whereas more advanced learners could be asked to play around with the intonation. They could exaggerate it. They could underplay it. They could try to speak like a bored robot or an excited human. And that element of play will help them in terms of their appreciation of this point. They can go on and write their own mini dialogues, decide where the intonation should be, rehearse it, perform it for the class. So there's lots of things you can do essentially with similar activities to help those learners with of differing abilities. Okay, back to Herbert.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Well, this is actually the last point on the agenda. And this is basically about laying out our vision of what materials and digital tools could actually do to help us with differentiation. So to make differentiation work with my classes, I would need, can you just type in your continuation to this sentence stem, please? Thanks for your compliments. Could you just type in your completion? To make differentiation work with my classes, I would need to prepare more carefully. More time for planning, creativity and time, organization, use different learning styles, more time with the students, digital tools. Yes, Hannah, thank you. Consider my students 26 hours in a day. Materials, somebody is saying. Yes, more time for planning. Okay, so that's our vision too, that what we have said so far is very important, but we think that materials and digital tools that are specifically created to help with differentiation are needed, okay? So here is a differentiation landscape, basically, what we've spoken about so far. And when you look here, we've spoken about differentiating tasks, content, using different strategies, depending on my learner's needs. A key point that comes out from what you're saying here is that we need things that help us, because differentiation actually takes a lot of our time. Preparing for it and using it takes a lot of our time, and that's where specific digital tools could help and would give us better evidence and data of our students' learning. So that this regular cycle of learning and assessment that Chris actually mentioned at the beginning of the session becomes an inherent principle to the teaching and learning process in my class, so that in the end we can help our learners also with personalizing their language learning better. And Chris will give you a short overview of the vision that we have here. This will only take a few minutes, and please stay on to the end, because we are also going to announce a webinar in which we are actually going to share some of these ideas and how they work in reality. Chris, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for staying on slightly longer. I'll try and do this in 2 minutes. Next slide, please, Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just a bit more detail about that ideal differentiation landscape that Herbert showed you. We're talking about differentiated content here. We know that it's not possible as a teacher to generate your own differentiated content much of the time. It's a big job. This stuff doesn't grow on trees. If you want to have things like you can see on the screen here, 2 versions of the same text, one with much more language and text in it, one that's much more visual, but basically telling the same story, so you can use it with the same class simultaneously, you probably need that to be provided for you. Next slide, please. The same with differentiated tasks. It's probably easier to come up with your own differentiated tasks, but if these can be provided, so you've got various examples here where either you or the students can choose who does option A or option B in terms of the slightly more challenging or the less challenging activity, depending on what they feel comfortable with and what they're able to do. Having this provided for you is obviously going to be very helpful. It will help. Next slide is fine. Thank you.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. We talked earlier about, what is it that you differentiate anyway? Okay, it's content, it's the process in terms of the tasks that learners do, and it's their output, the product, their product at the end. Different scenarios are possible. You could have a reading text in 2 different versions where in the same class at the same time you give the students who need more support the more visual version, the stronger students the more text-heavy version. They could then go on and do the same tasks and produce the same output at the end. Or, next slide, you could have a scenario where they have the 2 versions of the text, they do different tasks and the same output. Or the next slide. It could be, again, different versions of the text, similar tasks, different outputs. So there are various ways of cutting and slicing this. Next one again, please. As we saw with one of the examples that we showed you earlier, when there's audio involved, probably you're going to have all the students listening at the same time, but the tasks may be different and the output may be different or similar. Different ways you can do this. Next slide, please. The point being, though, that you probably need support and help in this because it's very time consuming. So the differentiated content, the differentiated tasks, as well as practical ideas and strategies and examples of how you can actually put this into practice, as well as those underlying principles that are so important. And fortunately, we have early next year a book coming out where we will be, Herbert and I, running you through our thinking on this, those principles about differentiation, and many, many practical examples of those strategies that you can use that don't imply a new methodology. It's not a completely new way of teaching. It's about nudging things up and down with the group that you have so that you're meeting students where they are and helping them and being fair to them, basically. Okay, next one, just a couple more slides to go. Digital tools are really key. We've mentioned that at various times. That thing about the sat-nav, it helps you by feeding you the information you need. But then it's also about your judgment and your observation, and you pull those things together to have that accurate view of your learners and where they are. Next slide, please. That gives you, when you're thinking about the kind of data and evidence that you can get from online platforms that learners are using, whether it's for formative assessment, practice activities, you can really see by drilling, and they can see as well, where they're doing well, where they need to do further work to improve. That's, about following the path that they're on, like the wolf analogy, and the regular cycles of learning and assessment. Really important that these are regular so that you maintain an accurate view of where your learners are. Moving on again to the next slide. And all that information that you gather, whether it's through those digital tools or your own observations, can lead to that more personalized learning, which may happen in the classroom in terms of the kind of activities we've shown you, but may happen online where learners work independently and can actually basically spend their time doing what is going to be most useful to them based on their performance in previous activities or informative tests. Okay, last slide, I think, coming up. Okay, just, thank you, big thank you to everyone for participating today, for joining us, for staying on a bit longer. I think there is time for more questions if anyone has any. And as was mentioned earlier, we have another webinar coming up in the middle of February, the 15th of February, where we'll show you many more very specific concrete materials and tools that will support you in implementing differentiated learning with your teaching and learning with your classes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Herbert. A fantastic session. As you can see, the comments are flooding in the chat box. Lots and lots of people excited about your new resource book, about the materials that you spoke about. If you would do me the favor just to move to the very last slide. For those of you that haven't already registered for the Helbling newsletter, please do so. If you scan the QR code, you'll get information about where to find the recordings of our webinars on our website, Instagram, Facebook, across all of our social media.